Hey everyone, this is Sina with another episode of Into the Bytecode. So this is a special episode that I recorded at BaseCamp. Base launched close to a year ago, and this was the first time that they've brought the bigger community together in person. So I recorded 4 conversations there. They're shorter than usual, about 20 to 30 minutes each, but we still cover a lot of interesting material. The first conversation is with Jesse Pollak, the creator of Base. The second one is with Ben Leventhal, the founder and CEO of Blackbird. Third one's with Julian Holguin, the CEO of Doodles. And the fourth one is with Yele Bademosi, the co-founder and CEO of Onboard. And I hope together these conversations give you a sense of what folks are building on Base today and what it was like to be at BaseCamp. And with that, I'll leave you to it.
My first question is, why are we here in Idlewild, and what role does this place play in the story of Base?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for being here. You did one of my favorite podcasts of all time that I've ever done, and we invited you as a builder, but then me and Crystal were talking about like, how do we capture this moment? And I was like, oh, we got to ask Sina to be here, to like, you're already going to be here to just try and like capture what's going on here. So I'm just so grateful that you did that. Why Idlewild? I mean, like the story for Idlewild starts with my intuition last year, which was like we were about 5-6 weeks out from launch, so we had line of sight to where it was, when we were going to do it, and I just kind of had this feeling that like Base had the potential to be very important in history. And we had this incredible team, but no one had spent that much time together because, we're a remote culture and we were kind of all around the world. And I had this feeling that like we needed to bring everyone together for it. And we couldn't just bring everyone together to like sit in an office. We needed to like do something a little crazy, and like be somewhere that meant something. And it didn't need to mean something to us at the beginning, but by the end it needed to mean something. And so that's what we did. I told my team, I was like, you guys, we have to organize a team offsite to go to Idlewild, because I like looked at the calendar. I was like, oh, Fest is happening. Like there's creativity there. That seems like the right cocoon. It's in the mountains. And in like 5 weeks, we like pulled it together. We like worked with the Fest team. They were super gracious. We were already kind of like sponsoring Fest. And they were like, yeah, you can come. Like you can eat out of the cafeteria. Like it's going to be, cafeteria food. And, we'll help you get hotels. And we can give you like a little barn or whatever it is, like building where you can, hang out and work during the day. And so in 5 weeks, we just decided to do that. And we flew everyone out from the team. It was about 30 people. And we spent, I think we flew in on Tuesday, and then we had Wednesday as like the prep day of like everyone doing the final preparations for launch. And then Thursday, we woke up at 4 a.m. because it was also an earnings day. Today's an earnings day. That day was an earnings day. And we needed to get the launch out before the market opened. And so we had a 6 a.m. deadline. So we all woke up at 4 a.m. and we launched Base at 5. And or maybe we launched it at 6 because it was at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then like we had an incredible day. People stayed for Fest. And it was just such a formative experience. Like everyone talks about it. It's like, remember being in the woods together. And so as we started thinking about BaseCamp, and we knew we wanted to do BaseCamp, we like coming into this year, we were like, we're going to have to bring people together. We went back and forth on a lot of options. We thought about, we can go to our own place. We can go attach it to something else like DevCon. But I kept coming back to this idea of like, I just want to be somewhere beautiful surrounded by creativity. And I want it to feel like special. And it took like, originally like not everyone had been to it last year. And so they were skeptical. It's like, it's gonna be a logistics nightmare. It's gonna be really hard. Like, oh, it's really close to Fest. Is that gonna dilute what we're doing? And we just kept talking about it and kept talking about it. And we were ultimately like, no, this is actually going to be epic. And everyone kind of like got excited and was like, no, this is going to be really epic. And it's going to be a nightmare in a lot of ways. Like we're going to have to get...
I don't envy the planning team.
Like the logistics are a nightmare, but it's going to be special. And so that's what we did. And I mean, we're at the end of the day. We still have dinner, but I feel like it's kind of delivered on everything I wanted. Like it was rough getting here. Like people got stuck, buses broke down, took too long. It was 105 degrees weather, but then you come out of the desert up the hill on these curvy roads into the mountains, and you get here and the temperature drops 25 degrees and it's not super hot. It's like the perfect temperature, and the sun sets and it's incredibly beautiful. and you're surrounded by brilliant people working on this thing that we all love. And I think the second people check into that and they like have their first bite of food, they're like, oh, this is something special. This is not like something I've ever done before. And that's the feeling that I have about Base generally. And that's the feeling that I wanted everyone to have and that we wanted everyone to have when they came here, to be surrounded by all the other people who are building this thing with them.
Yeah, last night you said this thing that you just had your wedding and your honeymoon, and being in that room felt like being at a second, your second wedding or something like that. And that I know you've kind of been intentional about the group of people that you've brought here together. And there's a lot of people who also couldn't be here that have called in. But how did you think about curating this event and how it represents the kind of larger Base ecosystem?
Yeah, yeah. And it really does feel like a second wedding. It's really weird. It's like it's all these people who I love, and I know all of them. Some of them I've never met before, and there's a lot of them. I mean, my wedding was like 160 people. This is 400 people, and so it's like a big wedding. And I'm, like I'm hosting, and so my goal is to have a conversation with every single person here, and like that's a lot of people. And so it's definitely a lot of emotional energy for me of just like showing up and smiling and connecting and trying to figure out like what can I learn from this person. So that's kind of the wedding part. In terms of the like how did we figure out what the right constellation was, we started with a constraint, right? Like we had the constraint of like this space can only fit so many people, right? Like the theater we're sitting in has room for 299 seats. We knew we could have people sit on the stairs like they did in the packed room today. The dining hall has a fire limit of about 350 people. And so we knew we were zeroed in on like 350, 360, maybe a little bit more with breakage there. And so that was a good constraint. And then we knew that we had something like 50 to 70 people from like the Base team, plus like folks from Coinbase who were working closely. And so that was kind of like brought us down to about 300. And then we felt like we're a year into Base, and so at this point we have a really good understanding of like who's been here, like who's been building, who's contributed to making Base what it is today. And so we built a freaking massive list of like, here's every single person we've worked with, here's the team, here's the individuals, and we went in waves and we sent out invites and we went one by one and we said, hey, like we really want you here. Like it's crazy. We're gonna bring you up to the mountains, but we're going to host the experience and we'd really love you to be here. And if you can't be here, we want to make sure that one person from your team is. Because with 300 slots, like there's a lot of builders in Base and we knew we couldn't fit anyone. And so that was the bulk of people. That was about like 200 people. And then we also knew that we didn't know everything, right? Like Base is massive and I have a lot of relationships. I'm very good at like connecting with people on Twitter and Warpcast, but like imperfect. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a pathway for anyone to be here. And so we also opened up applications. We had people record a little video because we found that works well, add a little bit more information about them. We got like, I don't know exact numbers, like hundreds of applications, and we filtered that down to about 75 folks. And those were folks, all of them were also Base builders. We just didn't know. Like we didn't know exactly that they were there. And that combination was the constellation that came here. And it's the perfect, it's like it feels about the max size that this thing could be. Like the level of connectiveness and intimacy is like I think really only possible at this size. But I also think it's been hard because like a lot of other people have wanted to be here, right? There's so many incredible builders in Base, and some of those people we didn't have room for because we hit max limits, and that's hard. Some of those people are in countries where they can't get visas to come here, right? And so like that I think was a reality, a hard reality for us. And so we've tried really hard to also find ways to open this up to everyone. I mean, that's why we live streamed everything today. We really worked hard to make sure that people knew this was happening, that they could tune in, that they could stream. And I think that sort of like inclusiveness, I mean, Base is for everyone. Not everyone's gonna be able to be here, but we want everyone to still be a part of it.
So one of the things that's been particularly cool for me today is meeting more of the Base team and getting to know who's actually building this thing. How would you describe the shape of the Base team? Like, what are the subsections of it?
Yeah.
What are folks working on?
Yeah.
Like, just to someone who doesn't have the context, how should they think about how this is happening?
Yeah. So the base team started as just a startup, right? It was, we went on kind of like a long journey, but doing kind of like product discovery, built a bunch of things with like a 10, 15 person team, which was honestly too big at the time in reflection. None of those products worked. And so after about a year of doing that, we actually, like me and Max Brandsburg, who was here, who at the time was kind of like my boss. Essentially, I had two bosses, like head of engineering, head of product, and we all made the decision of like, this isn't working. Like, we need to shut it down and like give Jesse a little bit more space. And so give Jesse and the team. So we shut it down. The guidance was kind of like, go figure out how to like take the learnings and help some other parts of the company. And at that point, it was me and 4 engineers, and we did this thing called On-Chain October in 2022, which was just like, let's go build some stuff on chain. And it was kind of like no pressure. Before, I'd been doing weekly meetings with our exec team, like reporting on like my progress, trying to come up with the next product idea for Coinbase. And now it's like, no, everyone just was left us alone, and we just hacked for a month. And that was the beginning of Base. We like week 1, Michael DeHoog, who's kind of like CTO of Base, was like, I think we should build an L2, and I'm like gonna build it this week. And we launched that test net, and like people started using it, and me and him and others built conviction of like, whoa, like maybe there's something here. And then it was kind of off to the races, but the team still was very small for the first, like basically all the way through the mainnet launch. Like our engineering team at mainnet launch was about like 8 people probably, and we had like 1, 2 marketing people, like 1 to 2 BD people, kind of like helping, someone legal helping, but very, very small, really running as a startup and running with a huge amount of autonomy. And this, I think, is the thing that I give massive credit to Coinbase and Brian for. Like, from the beginning of Base, Brian has basically said, I trust you, go and build. And then my like interactions are like, I meet with him every few weeks. I share what's top of mind. I ask him where I need help. I have to do like quarterly business reviews where we talk about, the team and the progress and impact and revenue and all these things. But from a like decision-making perspective, we are running, like as a startup. And I think that culture has been so important to Base from the beginning. And then I think the other culture that's been very important to Base from the beginning is that it's an engineering-led team. Like, I'm an engineer. I was always an engineer. My official title at Coinbase is still VP of engineering. Like, I'm an engineer. And then the first people on the team were an engineer. We didn't have like a product person until April of this year. Like, it was just engineering. And it was me, and I was kind of doing product, and we were just like engineering, leading what we thought we wanted to build. And I think that that culture, it's like it's what comes through when we talk about builders and we talk about like this ethos. A lot of that comes from a team culture on Base, which is like, we all just love building. Like, there's all of us. Even the person, Tom, who did an incredible job today, he's an engineer. Like, we hired a product person, but before he was doing product at Base, he was writing Solidity, building a startup as an engineer. And so I think that's a really like big part of our culture, is just like very builder, very engineering driven. But then as we grew, we now have a really diverse team that operates as a startup. So, I run this team kind of as a mini CEO, and then, I have a head of marketing, a head of engineering, a head of product, a head of business or ecosystem, we call it, a head of legal, a head of security, and some really like technical leaders like Michael DeHoog and Roberto Bayardo, who are kind of like setting the long-term technical strategy. And those folks, either solid line report to me or dotted line report to me. But we work as a team, like in a leadership team. We do our leadership meeting every week. We have a go-to-market leads meeting. We have a product engineering leads meeting. We run as one team that's just executing as fast and effectively as we possibly can. And we all work together as one team. And so people aren't like, oh, I just do this. No, it's like, we all do everything. Right? Like, the engineers got up on the stage today and did the talks, right? Like, there was no one else to do that. The marketing people are like in the trenches like sometimes writing code, like Tina, who's like the PM working on Smart Wallet, she's like building the marketing websites and like running the go-to-markets for it. Like all of us really bring this ethos of like one team working together, whatever it takes to build this next generation of the internet. And I think that even as we've grown, that's been a really, really important thing for us to keep. And I'm really proud and grateful to get to do it.
Yeah.
It's such an incredible team.
Even my brief interactions with the events team and with Crystal to plan this recording has been freaking awesome. So
Yeah, they're awesome. I mean, it's a theme, right? Like, and this is I think one of the things that is really works for Bases. People get a chance to work with us because we're all constantly working with everyone in the ecosystem, and they like working with us.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this was like I've had a lot of other experiences where it's been painful, and this is actually like enjoyable. It's fun. Like we can have like a creative engagement. Like we can challenge each other. We can push each other. I mean, like last night, we were prepping. We've been prepping for this content for a week. It's not that long, a week and a half. It's very compressed, but a lot of hard work. And last night we were in here and, prep. Like this is the first time we're doing it. It's hard. Like doing that sort of prepared content is hard. And we had our whole team, and we had also like the people from the other teams who were doing the builder talks, the lightning talks. So it's like 6 CEOs who are incredible leaders, founders, and everyone's sitting in the room, and after every single person talked, it was like lightning feedback. Like all of us, like didn't matter who you were, didn't matter if you were Max Brandsburg, who's like on the executive team at Coinbase, the most senior person in the room, or like founder who has never met anyone else. Everyone was chiming in and being like, "How do we do better? How do we do better? How do we do better?" Because we all we're here, we all put in the work to make this happen, and we wanted it to be the best. And I think that like I don't know, there's something about the feeling, the vibes, the energy, the positivity that then creates space for like tension and like challenging and like pushing. And I think it leads to the best results because we don't settle for like, oh yeah, we're just going to go do this thing because that's what they want, or we're just going to do this thing because this is the way other people do it. It's like, no, like let's go figure out what the best thing is to do. And if we will start from a place of we want to collaborate with this person, let's work backwards from, okay, what is the best version of that collaboration? And how do we make sure that we're appropriately kind of applying pressure and pushing each other to get to it?
So you described the mission of Base as building an on-chain economy that helps bring more innovation, creativity, and freedom into the world. And I'm curious how you arrived at that formulation and why those 3 specific things.
That's a good question. And it's build a global on-chain economy. The global part's really important. A global on-chain economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom. And that came, we kind of landed on that late last year. The first year of Base, our like mission was clear. It was like, get this thing out the door. Literally, we realized that we needed to build this in like late November of 2022. And once we realized it, it was like, oh, like the clock is ticking. We need to figure out the other L2s are launching. Like we see this market opportunity. We feel like we have a really great opportunity to step into it. Like, how do we get this thing out as quickly as possible while, of course, maintaining our quality bars, security, etc. And so I think the first year of Base, we were just like, we all know what we're doing. We are executing the crap out of this, go. And that kind of persisted through On-Chain Summer, which, we worked so hard last year. I was like, I look back, we've showed some photos and we've looked at videos. Like I was not okay last year. And I think you and I actually talked kind of during this period. Like I was so anxious. I wasn't eating, like under feeling so much pressure to get this thing live because I really felt like you only get to launch this thing once and it's a network effect. And like having that network effect get started in a good way, it just felt like so much pressure that if we didn't land that, like this wouldn't work. And so I think for that year and for On-Chain Summer, it was so clear. And then we got to the end of On-Chain Summer and we were just like dead. Like my brain wasn't working. Like I'd done, 23 days straight of work, interviewing someone every single day, including the weekends, like after, 6 months before that working at full tilt. And I got to September and I was like, I'm really like, this is not okay. My wife and parents were kind of like, dude, like you need to change your life, like make some changes. And then we all knew like this was part of the sacrifice to get Base live. But we all kind of like took a step back in September, and I think people like turned it down to like zone 1 and the heart rate zone. And I had a few conversations with my coach during that time, and I was feeling all sorts of anxiety and doubt because I was like, we just did this thing, and now the team like we delivered the mission, and now the team doesn't know what to do, and they don't know where they're going, and I'm here, and I don't feel like I can give it to them. Like I don't know where we're going. I don't really know what we're going to accomplish in the next year. And she, bless her, I've been working with her for 6 years. She was like, this is okay. Like, you don't need to know. Like, you don't need to know right now. And what you need to figure out is you need to figure out how you're going to figure this out by the end of the year. Like, how do you take the rest of this year to figure out what's a process that you can run with your team to get that clarity? So as you head into the next year, you can celebrate all the incredible work that you've done, and you can be fired up, ready to go to take on the next challenge. And that really, like, once I settled into that of like, oh, it doesn't have to happen in September. Like, we can have some space. We don't have to always go full tilt. I think that then opened up some space for us to be really thoughtful about it. And we brought kind of like the whole leadership group that we'd built together, and I wrote up kind of like, I really love this book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's such a good book. And so I wrote up like my first take at a good strategy, which is like, where do I think we are? What's the diagnosis? What's the environment? What are our opportunities, our challenges? What are the guiding principles that I think should really shape our strategy in the year ahead? And then what is kind of some of the coherent stuff we do as a result of that? I wrote that up. I shared that with the team. People like tore it apart, left comments. We did about a week of that kind of digital work, and then we all came together in a room and in New York, and we just talked about it for like 3 days. And we were just like, we had different people lead, different people brought their kind of own concepts in. We debated different parts of it. And I think through that, we kind of triangulated on like, what were we trying to do? And we started zeroing in on this idea of an economy. We've been looking for the word we were going to use because we've been talking about Base as like, this is a developer platform, but we started to feel, oh, it's not just a developer platform. Like clearly there's more than developer platform. And so we first hit that word. And I think like someone said it in the room and we were all like, oh, like that's it. Like it covers these pieces that we're talking about. And then it was kind of like, okay, we know what we're building. We're building an economy. Now, how do we kind of like describe that economy in such a way that we set the context and the North Star for ourselves and for our team? And so then we were really looking for qualifiers. We added an on-chain because it's an on-chain economy, it describes this technology. We knew it had to be global because that's really the whole point of crypto. It's like increasing economic freedom around the world. And then we were thinking about, okay, like who are the audiences that we care about? And like, what do we want to like what is the stance we want to take, and who do we want to speak to? And the freedom stuff came pretty naturally because it's Coinbase's mission, right? Like economic freedom. If you look at Coinbase's website, it's our mission is to increase economic freedom around the world. And so if we're going to build this on-chain economy, it's got to increase freedom. Like an on-chain economy that increases freedom is increasing economic freedom in the world. So that came very naturally. Innovation also came very naturally, because I think all of us saw all of these developers that were building on Base. And it was like, we want to support these people to innovate. Like, this is the thing that all of us kind of like grew up in this space thinking about. Like, I grew up like looking up to entrepreneurs. Like, we want to let people do that. And then the one that we kind of took a while to get to was creativity. And this is one that felt really important to me, but I don't think everyone else like quite saw from the beginning, because I think folks look at like the innovation and freedom and they're like, okay, that's great. It's like innovation and freedom. Like those cover the technology side, it covers the Coinbase side, like we're great. But I think from the beginning of Base, I think I and then other folks on the team as well have had this very strong intuition that like if we do not bring in real genuine creativity and culture, like this will not be a vibrant place. Like it won't be a vibrant place because it's that creativity and culture that makes an economy work. Like you can't just have like raw innovation. You can't just have raw freedom. You need creativity to kind of make the space for the people that I think are often overlooked in our systems and aren't as celebrated and aren't put on a pedestal, but making the space for them, I think is absolutely important. And so we had a bunch of back and forth and we actually almost settled on not including it. And then it was kind of like, no, you guys, like we got to do this. And that was how we ended up with, building a global on-chain economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom. And that was kind of the mission that we set. We then had a bunch of kind of strategic pillars that we distilled out, around building a powerful developer platform, nurturing a vibrant app ecosystem, healthy capital markets, and a scalable decentralized platform. And that was like, okay, like, here we go. This is it. Like, now that we have this is everything for us. It's like literally every single thing we should do needs to ladder up to this mission and kind of connect to one of these strategic pillars. And, I've been, I started a company for right out of college and I ran that for 5 years. And then I helped, I co-led our consumer business. And I will say, in all of that experience, I have never felt as much conviction or clarity around a mission, vision, and strategy versus what we have right now. It is like so clear. It makes so much sense to me. It makes so much sense to our team. The strategic pillars are so aligned to the work that people are doing. We have clear North Stars that align to every single one of those strategic pillars. And so it almost feels like this perfect like pyramid of like alignment and messaging where it's like everyone knows what they're doing. And I think that is just it's a very powerful tool for making for like increasing efficiency and helping us get to our goal faster because everyone knows what they're doing and they understand the context of it. They can just go and do their best work. They don't have to be asking questions. They don't have to be coordinating. They can just go and do their best work. And I think that's what led to Base.
Super powerful. We're at 5:59. Do you want one more?
Yeah, let's do it.
We got one more.
Yeah, there's no rush.
Yeah.
I'm talkative. This is, got some long answers here.
This is why that first podcast was so good. I feel like there's like so many rabbit holes here too. I want to ask.
Yeah, it's good. You asked such a good question. I mean, I love that question.
Zones, the coach, like there's a lot I want to dig into.
Yeah, well, no one's asked that question about the mission before, and I honestly, I feel like it's one of our greatest superpowers is that it's so clear.
Yeah.
And it also brings so much meaning to my life because, and I think folks on our team too, and I hope folks in the ecosystem too, because like when I think about this is what I'm doing, like I'm building a global on-chain economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom. It's like, wow, like this is the most meaningful work I could ever possibly imagine. That's a really special thing.
All right, last question. So we're here at the 1-year anniversary of Base, and you ended your presentation this morning with 3 kind of calls to action for the 2nd year of Base. And you said 3 things: make something people want, build dead simple experiences, and bring new people on chain. And why these 3? And how do you think about the next year that's ahead of us?
Why these 3? I mean, yeah, like when we were we spent so much time thinking about like what are the messages that we want to land. I think when we were thinking about my kind of section of this, we wanted to keep it at a high altitude, but I think that my voice in the Base ecosystem is so powerful. Like people, they hear the things that I say and then they actually go and do those things. And that's like it's a privileged position. It's also like with great privilege comes great responsibility. And
it's like Vitalik telling you to go solve 4844.
Right, it's like Vitalik telling me to go solve 4844, which he just did. He did that and then he did 4337. He just told us to solve some other things. And so we kind of came into this and we were like, okay, well, if we could like turn the switch in people's brains of like, 3 things that we really felt like would meaningfully like steepen the curve of adoption and like change our trajectory, increase the likelihood that we go from, you know, the millions of people who are on chain today, like using it every day, to like tens of millions and hundreds of millions. Like, what are they? And I think the make something people want one, I feel like that's almost like it feels like common knowledge right now in crypto. Like, this is the meta. Like, people have gotten sick of infrastructure and everyone knows we want apps. And so I didn't feel like that was particularly innovative, but it felt really important to land, right? It's like, this is the thing I think that Base has actually been leading the way on. And I look at all these people who are kind of going to conferences and being like, you know, where are all the people building apps? I'm like, where aren't all the people building apps? Like, literally all I do every day is talk to people building apps. And there's so many incredible builders building apps. And so I think like emphasizing that again and just being like, you guys, like, the stuff you're doing is good. Like, that's maybe less a command. It's almost more a validation of the way that builders on Base have been thinking for the last year, and kind of saying, keep doing that. Like, don't get distracted by the noise. Don't get distracted by the money. Don't get distracted by whatever it is. Just focus on making something people want. I think that was like very clear. The build great user experiences, this kind of came from a thing that I've been saying for now 2 years, which is that it's always felt like there's 3 things that have been holding back crypto adoption: high fees, painful wallets, and a lack of a coherent identity for who people are on chain. And I think as we were thinking about this, and as we were thinking about all the progress we made over the last 2 years, it really feels like, oh, like, those problems, you know, they're not perfectly solved, but they're solved. Like, you can now build on chain and it can be incredibly cheap. It can be incredibly easy to use. And it can bring this whole identity that you've already built on chain. So every app can interoperate and kind of plug into that. And so I think that was kind of like a new rallying cry, which is like, we need to get out of this world where we compare ourselves to like what crypto has been. Like, we need to get out of the world of saying like, this is great for crypto. Like, that's not good enough. Like, we're not going to bring 1 billion people on chain, as we like to say, if we're just saying, oh, this is good enough for crypto. Like, this is, you know, good for crypto. No, the only way we do that is if we build apps that are better than everything else in the market, period. And we finally have the tools. And so I think that's kind of like a wake up call for people. It's like, wake the fuck up. Like, you got to be better. And I loved, you know, you saw the builder presentations and we got to see them last night early. And the first one was Ben Leventhal, who led the way. He's building Blackbird. And his, like, we asked people to kind of share one learning, and his learning was magic first. And I'm like, yes, like this, like it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is, do people have a magical experience? Like, that is what matters. And we finally have the technology to do that. So that was really a rallying cry. And then the last one around kind of bringing people on chain, I think that this is kind of like almost like a value statement about who we are and how we approach this problem. And I think one of the places this comes from is like, we're not above any work. I'm not above any work. As the leader of the Base team, like, I pick up the trash. Like, I'll sleep on the couch if that's what's required. Like, I'll call the people. I'll take whatever call. Every day, I respond to probably somewhere between 200 and 300 DMs from builders across Telegram, Warpcast, and Instagram. Like, I finish all my other work, and then it's like, 8, 9 p.m. And I'm like, okay, now I got to get through like all of my DMs. And, like I it's not always substantive, but I try and give everyone the time of day. And I think that is like this ethos of trying to just like be humble and grounded and like embrace this idea that like we're not above anything and it's going to require all of us to give our best. And that applies to this idea of bring new people on chain, because it's really about like everyone can do it. Like, bring your mom on chain, bring your dad on chain, bring your grandparents on chain. If you do that, not only is it going to help, but it's going to be so freaking helpful for you learning what you need to do better, for how to make your product easier to use, to how to build something that people want, and combining that kind of value statement of like, we are not above any work, including the hard work of bringing new people on chain, with the call to action, which is like, go do it. Like, it's time. Like, we need to go get billions of people on chain, and the only way it happens involves work hard on it. I think that was a really powerful way to kind of like close it landing. And then of course, those are the three things we said, but then there's a fourth one. There's one more thing, which is stay based. And that again is for me, like, it's messaging consistency. It's like every week I try and find a way to remind people, what does it mean to be based? Because I think if I say that again and again, and I kind of imbue this idea of working hard, staying optimistic, putting the team over the individual, pushing boundaries with creativity, and doing the right thing into this word based, it's incredibly powerful, because then anytime someone says based, whether it's in a reply or it's in person, that's what lands for people. And it's this self-reinforcing mechanism of imbuing a value system into the economy, so that anyone who builds in the economy, anyone who is kind of defining their role in the economy, wants to stay based and changes their work and their life to embody those values. And I think that's the way we get to a global on-chain economy that increases economic freedom and innovation and creativity. And that's the way we make the world a better place. And so, yeah, that's the story of how that came to be.
Hell yeah. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for doing this. This is awesome.
Yeah.
That's it with Jesse. My next conversation is with Ben Leventhal, the founder and CEO of Blackbird. Ben was previously the founder of Eater and Resi and has a lot of experience in the restaurant business. So we talk about the problem that they're solving with Blackbird, the new L3 they've built on Base, and how they're approaching designing an economy that connects restaurants, customers, and other stakeholders around them.
So I thought we'd start with a simple question. What is Blackbird, and why are you working on this?
Blackbird is a loyalty and payments platform built specifically for the restaurant industry. We're working on this because we love restaurants. We have a deep passion for restaurants. Restaurants are an incredible industry. It's $1 trillion in size in the US alone. But restaurants individually struggle. They're small businesses. They're often subscale. The amount of enthusiasm that consumers have for restaurants makes them feel much bigger than they actually are. So in order for restaurants to change the paradigm for themselves and to get in control of their own destiny economically and to be much more sustainable businesses long term, some things have to change about the technology and about how consumers and restaurants connect. And that's why we got into this mess, and that's precisely what we're focusing on.
So how would you describe the existing relationship between customers and restaurants, and how it is that you're changing it?
Well, I think the role of technology today, which has developed over the last 50 years or so, if you take it all the way back to things like credit cards and charge cards, the role of technology for the most part is to sit in between the customer and the restaurant. It used to be, before technology, you walk into a restaurant, maybe you use the telephone, but you'd use the telephone to call a human on the other side. And you'd walk in and you'd pay, and you might even use cash. And if you didn't use cash, you used check. And those things are fundamentally more intimate as far as the experience goes, right? Between a consumer and a restaurant, if all the tech is removed. And so over the last 50 years, in many ways, what's happened is an increasing number of pieces of technology have gotten in the middle. And they're not all behaving in nefarious or counterproductive ways. There's lots of good tech, but by and large, I think this problem is developed because restaurants just increasingly don't know who their customers are. And it's because of all the tech, and it's because to understand in a sophisticated and scalable way, who are my customers, what's their value, how do I keep them coming back, there's too many systems to put together. And the average restaurant just doesn't have the resources at its disposal to figure that all out.
Like, whereas before it would have been a one-on-one personal relationship, the person who lives down the street and drops in regularly, you're on a first name basis with them. now restaurants are able to operate at much larger scale. A lot of the operations and complexity are abstracted away from them, but that comes with this degree of impersonalization.
That's precisely right. It comes with a degree of impersonalization, and it comes at expense too. I mean, the other thing is that as more and more technology has found its way into the restaurant is paying more and more for that tech. So you have the sort of compound problem of restaurants having a less sophisticated understanding of who their customers are, a less intimate understanding of who their customers are, while at the same time paying more and more for things like processing and reservations and POS and anything else.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can go down this rabbit hole a bit because it ties into Blackbird's economic model too, I imagine. But if we were to take the archetypal restaurant that you have in mind, what do their finances look like? Like, what is the business of running a restaurant on the inside? And how is that changing through these technologies?
Well, what's kind of fascinating about the restaurant's P&L and the way restaurants model the business is it's all a cost-based model, and it's all a cost-based strategy, meaning that restaurants have an understanding of how costs need to cap out relative to revenue, right? So food cost, this is something that people talk about pretty commonly. Food cost, sort of, you want it to cap out at 30%. And if it can cap out at 28, 27%, you've captured some margin there. Labor, similarly, you want that to cap out, somewhere in a similar ballpark. Occupancy, how much you pay for rent and rent related expenses, the closer that can get to 5-6%, the better. In big cities, that's a number that often is way higher. So the restaurant model looks like that. And what I find fascinating is that nowhere in the model and nowhere in the plan of the average restaurant do you see things like revenue growth projections. You don't really look at a restaurant business and say, well, we're projecting 12% year over year growth. We're going to do X, Y, and Z from a marketing standpoint. We're going to invest in these three things, and we think it's going to result in us growing top line revenue by 20%. The kinds of things that you do in a scale business, right? The kinds of things that are bedrock to a company that's growing, the company that's large, that's on a long-term basis profitable. You need those kinds of levers. And restaurants don't do that. We think primarily because they don't understand how to think about LTV and CAC and the fundamentals that you'd need to understand to think about those kinds of projections.
Is this also a matter of putting folks into more of a economic financial mindset, or is it that the business is kind of operating on such thin margins that you kind of don't have the headspace to think about how do you grow things? Like, well, what if we kind of ask the three whys underneath why it's been in this way? What's your diagnosis?
I think to some extent, restaurants are just spread very thin from a resources standpoint. I mean, I think if you look at the good operators around the world, they're doing some things instinctively that are just good, sound business operations. But the analysis of data, for example, restaurants don't have the resources for that in-house. The team to do marketing, although there's sometimes a marketing person or, a social media manager type person, marketing is not really something restaurants have in-house. So I think a lot of it just does come down to resources. I think restaurants do get sophisticated about the things that are in front of their face. Good restaurants are run by really good entrepreneurs. And as we know, really good entrepreneurs figure things out. But I think the problem with how they operate does come down to this sort of unique challenge of lack of resources and lack of margin to sort of have room to invest in something like marketing or data and analytics. And so what you find yourself doing as a restaurateur is just solving, today's problems today, and you don't get to the bigger stuff.
Yeah. Well, so in the few minutes that we've had, I think we've kind of maybe fleshed out the problem a little bit. So how does Blackbird change this dynamic?
Well, if we really reduce it down to essential elements. We think we can give restaurants CAC, LTV, and a currency so that they can control their own destiny. And that currency, of course, is Fly. And the rest of it is around those fundamentals. So this is going to take time, and we don't expect restaurants to get a bunch of dials on a screen tomorrow and be able to all of a sudden change the way they operate. But with those three fundamental things, we can change a lot about how restaurants think about operations. We can make sure that they have an incentive that gets people into a seat on a Tuesday night if Tuesday night's the quiet night, right? We can give them a very good, easy, straightforward, compelling lever to essentially say to consumers, and maybe consumers who've been to the restaurant twice, for example, Tuesday night is 15% off for you. And that's really, in the end, how we think about fixing this. And so to build to that, obviously we need to be in the flow of payments. We need to be connected to consumers. We need to understand consumers in a granular, sophisticated way. But at the end of the day, when we say we want to give restaurants tools to control their own destiny, we're really saying we want to be able to get to the point where there's a button on a screen that says, I need more customers, and we can deliver those customers to the restaurant.
Yeah. So taking that, I feel like there would have been one way of implementing that, which is to build a more traditional company with a tech offering, maybe have an in-app currency of some sort that allows these restaurants to incentivize people, but you kind of chose to build this on crypto rails. Why that?
Well, we think that there's two ways that crypto is really interesting for us on a long-term basis. And let me also say, to start with, I think it's fair to say that anyone who's building in blockchain and crypto technologies today, to some extent, is investing in and future-proofing for the future. A lot of what we believe about what crypto and blockchain can do is not really a reality today because of all the reasons why. It's still subscale, and consumers are laggards, and everything we understand about crypto. So in a broad way, we are investing for a future state of technology and of how consumers behave. But that being said, there's two fundamental things that we're doing on chain, and we're doing them now, and we're already starting to see exciting results. So one is your identity, anonymized, exists on chain, and all of your dining behavior is in a wallet that houses all of your check-ins, all of your connections to restaurants. It's anonymized, so you're not going to be doxxed by virtue of checking in somewhere. But that as a profile of a diner is something that we're excited about being interoperable. There's a lot of ways that you as a diner could take that profile and use it in other contexts, and there's a lot of ways where things could be developed around that set of data. So that's the first thing. The second area is around payments. And we strongly believe that the way to build a payments network and do it in a way where it's secure and scaled and works the way it's supposed to and costs what it's supposed to, we strongly believe that has to be on-chain. And so today, already, when a consumer walks into a Blackbird restaurant and pays the bill, we're taking funds from the consumer's crypto wallet and we're moving them to the restaurant's wallet. And we're doing that all in and getting it out on the other side for way, way less than we could do using traditional rails. And we can pass that savings off to the restaurant. So we can say to the restaurant, we understand you're paying 3.5%-4% to process a credit card using the legacy system. We can process that same transaction for you for 2%. So if we're saving restaurants 50% just by flipping the switch, we're off to a good start. And I think as the system develops, as we continue to develop the technology, it being fundamentally anchored around being on chain matters a lot.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about that second point because I feel like we often think of crypto as a payments platform shining when we're talking about cross-border or around the world. But even here in the US, if you're paying a business and there's a 3-4% kind of fee that different intermediaries take, and if both sides have either Fly or USDC or something like that, there's no fees whatsoever that need to be lost there.
That's precisely it. And And we often forget about those fees when ticket price is higher. When AOV is higher or the margins on the business we're talking about are greater, the 4% isn't as painful. But when the margins in restaurants are 4% to begin with, and this is the difference between your margins being 4% and 6%, it matters a ton. So I think this restaurant industry is uniquely positioned to care about this issue, and to solve it.
Yeah. Maybe more about the first point you shared, which was the customer identity data being on chain and being legible to the outside. What sorts of things are you excited about seeing other people, other companies build on this protocol and data set as it grows from here?
We're having this conversation at BaseCamp, and so we've had some great conversations in and around the conference on this just in the last 24 hours or so. But I would say there's a couple of things in particular that we're excited about when you think about what an identity allows you to do in terms of just matching people. Not necessarily in a dating setting, but of course you could. But for example, we know definitively if you check into 25 restaurants, we know who the servers are in those restaurants because they're checking in as well. And we could have a platform that essentially allows you to create relationships directly with workers in the restaurant, right? You could tip them directly. You could understand how to create those connections,
It's
right?
kind of like makes me think of Peloton or something,
Sure.
where you build the direct relationship with the instructor.
Sure. That's the tip of the iceberg. You can think about this in messaging context, in marketing context. There's all kinds of things you can do. And this is the fundamental point here is that it's on chain, but also when you put it on chain, we change who's in control of it. And we change the control from being in the hands of a large entity, like we would in a legacy system. It's in some kind of monolithic Web 2 database that's controlled by a big entity, to it being in your control. So you can go and say, this is my Blackbird dining identity, and have the freedom and opportunity to use it in any setting you want.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we're here at BaseCamp, and you just launched a Flynet, which is a layer 3 protocol on Base.
Yeah.
So without getting into the deep weeds of it, but maybe a little bit, what was your thought process around doing this?
Well, I think our thought process continues to evolve as the technology does. But when we look at the state of blockchain tech today, and when we look at the Base ecosystem, it makes a lot of sense for us to stand up our own Web L3 because it is another it's another lever of both scale and control that we could have to open up and to create other things in and around the ecosystem. So when we can move Fly on our own L3, we think that creates a lot of exciting opportunity for both Blackbird and for other companies and other entities that want to also move Fly around. We also think that if we use our own L3, that data set, again, becomes something a little bit more discrete that people can use and develop and build around. So, we'll see. L3s, I don't mind admitting that L3s are sort of the current, hot new thing. So we'll see if we're right about that. We'll see how the stack evolves in that way. But again, there's some really interesting, compelling things happening in and around how the industry thinks about layering, L1s, L2s, L3s on top of each other, and how those systems work together, and we're excited about what might be.
Yeah. Reading the white paper that you published, I kind of got the sense that you're thinking of this of Blackbird as an economy, right? You're not looking at it as a single player company building a product. You're thinking of it as you're kind of building an economy, an ecosystem with multiple stakeholders. And there's customers, there's restaurants, there's other builders, companies. And the layer 3 and both the Fly and the F2 gas token are in some ways the levers you have to kind of like design. They're like the fiscal and monetary policy, or the legislation of this economy. So
Precisely.
yeah. So how, like from an economy design point of view, like what are you looking to do? What are your goals maybe in how you've been trying to design this?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I did minor in econ
Nice.
undergrad. So obviously now I can talk about economics. Um, so I think the best I could say from a sort of pure economic standpoint is that, in the end, creating an economy is about balancing and creating equilibrium among stakeholders and aligning incentives, right? So we think that F2 and Fly are the way to do these things. So obviously, Fly can create, as I said earlier, a currency for restaurants to go and get consumers, right? Similarly, with F2, we eventually intend for, obviously that's the cost of running our network. We intend for that to be a more broadly sort of open economic system where you'd have different participants benefiting from and having influence over how the network processes, at what cost, under what circumstances. But in the end, as you said, these are levers to create an economy and align or find misaligned incentives and to fix them. And so we'll figure out how that all looks as time goes on.
Yeah. Maybe we're kind of coming up on time, but maybe as a fun closing question, I feel like you've kind of been around through multiple cycles and eras of technology where sometimes there's new technologies, they have new affordances, there's a lot of idealism, then the reality kind of comes in. How do you think we'll look back on this era that we're in today? Like where do you think we are in the longer arc of crypto as a technology?
I think we'll look back on this era nostalgically. We'll remember it fondly for its chaos and intimacy. I think we'll, in hindsight, be amazed at how rudimentary the technology was in hindsight. But we'll think about it as, the sweet spot of creativity as blockchain tech develops. And as I said, I think we'll all wish we could do things as easily and as quickly and as intimately and spontaneously as we're doing them now. Because clearly, as these systems develop, we'll trade seriousness and scale and capabilities for some of that fast and loose behavior. But it's an exciting time for sure, and a magical one. And we look forward to seeing how it plays out from here.
Thank you. I think we can call it there.
Thank you.
My next conversation is with Julian Holguin, the CEO of Doodles. Julian was previously the CEO of Billboard, where he helped bring that organization into the modern world of the internet and social media. In this conversation, we talk about how Doodles is a new kind of IP and media franchise that's on-chain native, and what that really means when we dig into it.
So I thought maybe as a first question, what is Dollsville and the Doodleverse, and why are you working on it?
Dollsville and the Doodleverse is our debut animation special, and why we're working on it is it's a storytelling product that we always saw ourselves creating. When we started everything up with Doodles, the idea was that we were building an IP, and we were building the IP in a brand new way. And we always wanted to have characters. We always wanted those stories to be told through characters. We wanted to create lore. And it wasn't an easy path to figure out how to actually do that at scale. We started talking to entertainment studios at the time. This is like mid 2022. And those conversations were interesting. People were very interested in the art, But to develop and adapt the IP, it was going to take a lot of work. It was going to take a lot of time. It was going to take a lot of money. And the studios didn't really understand what we were enough to want to make that bet. They were all interested in potentially giving us first look deals, which essentially means you're kind of exclusive to that studio as you start to develop, but there's no guarantees that your content actually gets made. There's no guarantees how much it's going to cost. There's no guarantees how much attention they're going to give to it, let alone like when the content might actually come out. And that was not the kind of control we were willing to give up at the time. So, especially because we were a funded company, we weren't a company that like really needed money to create. We needed the experts.
Maybe to go on a slight tangent before we continue this story, because I know you're also kind of thinking about what you're building as allowing other creators to also create IP over time, right? So I'm curious, like how does the existing status quo system work? Like what you described, what are recent examples of IP universes, character universes that have successfully gone through this? What does that landscape look like?
Sure. I mean, well, there are zero that emanated from Web3 and on-chain IP, but there are some alternative intellectual properties that came from places that are not just like pumping it into a movie theater or on television. There's things like Cocomelon, I think, is a good example, and that's like a major children's YouTube phenomenon. It's one of the biggest animation companies in the world right now. They're working on movies, television shows. They have deals with Netflix, everybody, but they started on YouTube. So there's Mr. Beast started on YouTube. He now has like this big show in development with Amazon. So there are examples of internet native IP actually getting made with traditional media, but the commonality between all of them is that they're massive fan bases. Like you're talking hundreds of millions of views on YouTube before a company like Amazon or Netflix is even interested in working with you. There's another great example. This show called Has Been Hotel started, with an animator on YouTube. She started making a bunch of videos. They got a ton of traction. She puts out a pilot. That pilot for her character universe does something like 100 million views or something like that. A24 Studios partners with her, buys the rights to actually make a series, and then a couple of years later they sell the series to Amazon, and it was one of Amazon's biggest openings for an animated cartoon show ever. So there are examples of this. The problem is, for creators, it takes a long time to be able to build an audience like that, and if you don't have your own financing, how are you actually going to be able to finance that journey for yourself? It's very difficult to do that. So us Doodles are like a new kind of opportunity to actually bring your IP to market, on-chain IP development, like getting a core community to kind of back you and support you really early on, so you can actually have some opportunity to keep creating the kinds of content that you want. Your community feels like they're part of it because they actually are part of it. So there's a lot of different ways that we're incubating IP, and acquiring our own animation studio actually helped us have the pipeline to even get to this moment of being able to release our first animation special, plus the soundtrack that's coming with it. It's not just the film, it's also the soundtrack with 3 songs, 3 animated music videos. I like to call Doodlesville and the Doodleverse basically a 2-month event where we're going to be producing brand partnerships, music videos, a ton of collecting experiences, live events over the course of the next basically 3 months, actually. And it's like, when you think about Doodles IP, it's not just a television show, it's not just a movie, it's a community, it's culture, it's on the internet, and it's always on. And I think the way you're going to look at franchises that are built the way we are, they're going to look a lot more sustainable than a movie franchise that comes around once every 4 years and might miss a whole wave of consumer behavior because a new social platform pops up, like TikTok, right? Like TikTok wasn't even a thing 5-6 years ago. So to keep up with the rate of change, you have to be nimble. And to be nimble, you have to be in a lot of places. And to be in a lot of places, you have to be more than one thing. And that ultimately is what I think on-chain IP, internet native IP, has a chance to be.
So that's like a deeper strategic kind of lens on what's happening in the world, which is that media, but everything more broadly is changing very rapidly, right? Like we're in a high variance world, things come in and out of favor. And if you're operating with long time horizons where you can, make a large upfront investment and it only kind of comes due in 4 years' time, you're going to be in a bad place. And what on-chain IP allows you to do is to have many more kind of lighter weight touch points with your community and audience through this period of time.
That's exactly right. And it lets you own the relationship with your audience. I ran Billboard, the music company, before we got started with Doodles. And basically, what it was at the time was a brand that was kind of like rising from the ashes of the music industry getting disrupted so bad, even before the print magazine fallout started. So once the print magazine fallout started and advertisers were no longer running ads in magazines, Billboard was already pretty much at zero when I got to the company. And that just happened to be the time where like YouTube video consumption really started. People were going on social media a lot more than they had been before, and IP started creating for the internet. But the thing was, what you could create, how you would distribute it, and how you would ultimately monetize it changed so frequently. So one year Facebook would be promoting their Facebook Live platform, and they would be subsidizing creators to actually make content for it. Creators like a Billboard would hire a staff to do it, and then the next year they would deprioritize that product, and you would be left with a staff and nowhere to monetize that content anymore. And then there was something on Twitter, and then there was something on Snapchat. So what I learned in the media industry basically from 2010 to 2022 was you needed to be nimble. If you weren't nimble, you had so much platform risk. And if you went all in on Facebook and you went all in on this platform and all in on that platform, you had risk of just not being around the following year. And that happened to a lot of people that were publishing content on the internet. So for me, that's ultimately what led me to the blockchain. I found new ways to monetize constantly, new ways to engage audiences. I learned about a lot of things that were happening on chain, mainly NBA Top Shot, and how the NBA was actually bringing new products to market through this new technology. And what I have found is just this is an opportunity where you can actually bring the IP and the community closer together and create a whole new attribution model for fandom, create a whole new distribution model for content. And we're in the very, very early innings, but at the end of the day, if you put all your eggs in one basket, it's a really, really big risk as a creator today.
Yeah. So maybe what would be helpful for me and probably other folks is when we're talking about on-chain IP, this is really it's like a very expressive toolkit almost, right? It rather than being any specific single, implementation of an idea. So I'm curious if you can share like maybe a sketch of some like overly concrete, like what are different things that you or other folks are trying that you think there's kind of like promise to, or that kind of points the way to how things could evolve going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at Doodles at face value, you can look at our YouTube account where we have over 220 million views and, different types of content. We do 6-second shorts, we do, minute-long short films, we're about to roll out music videos. We have content on Instagram. Short form video content is the most consumed content in the world right now, so we put a lot of priority on that. You can look at our content on Snapchat, you can look at our content on X. All of it is, developed native for that specific platform, but we exist across all of those channels. Now, what we do on YouTube is actually take products and merchandise that we make and tag them into the content we create. So as a user, you're watching this content, you're getting fed contextual merchandise that you could potentially buy. We don't get everybody, right? But some people want to buy that merchandise. They come through to our platform, which is an on-chain platform called the Studio. You get them to sign up for an account, and the technology is completely kind of done in the background where you get this wallet made and you get an NFT dropped in your wallet all within the matter of seconds, all by making a purchase with Apple Pay. Like, it feels a lot more like logging into Instagram or logging into Spotify than it does buying cryptocurrency, funding a MetaMask, etc. So we create all these consumer facing experiences, whether they're on social media or we have events in Chicago. We actually launched a live attraction. We do events at major cultural tentpoles like Complex Con and Pharrell's Something in the Water Festival, South by Southwest, etc. But onboarding people into a platform that you own so you can actually communicate with them and you can reward their loyalty by understanding like what their attribution is. That's how we see it evolving, like knowing who your core community is, creating content that people care about, and then being able to reward your community for actually participating day in and day out in your brand.
Yeah, I feel like the way that media creators have relationships with their audiences has also been changing a lot. There's the many of the on YouTube or Instagram, that relationship is mediated, right? So there's an algorithm that's sitting between you and your audience that controls whether you can ultimately reach them or not. In this world, do you see kind of the on-chain relationship also being a communication platform, or how do you kind of like build that relationship with these folks over time?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a firm believer in you have to meet people where they are. And right now, people are on social media. People are in messaging apps. So people like I would venture to say the majority of people's time is spent in WhatsApp, it's spent in Telegram, it's spent on X, it's spent on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc. So we will always create content for those platforms and we will always try and use that content to bring people into an experience that we own. And then when we get them into that experience, sometimes it's going to be through merchandise, sometimes it's going to be through, music video content that you can only get on our platform. But once you get them in there, you have them create the wallet, and wallets are now easy to communicate with people through, right? Like there's messaging services within wallets right now. There's content you can airdrop to people's wallets. We have email accounts. So when you sign up for an account, you can get an email. So like there's all these different ways that you can communicate with people on chain that didn't really exist in kind of the straight Web 2 infrastructure that's been built out and it's still so early, but we plan on building more rails where we can not just attribute people's behavior within our ecosystem, but work on retention by making sure that we have opportunities to communicate with these people constantly.
Yeah. One of the things that from the outside is noticeable about on-chain media is that because economics is so intimately woven into it, they can also go through booms and busts, right? There's a kind of like cyclical nature to them. Um, do you think that's a problem in any way? Or is that just part of what this media is? And if we kind of think of each of these as more lightweight interactions between a brand and their audience, we don't need to think of it as this kind of big financial thing. And our like very notion of a financial relationship itself is like becoming more fluid and relaxed over time. Like, how do you think about that?
I think it's going to become more fluid and relaxed over time because I think people are going to understand it more over time. And the reason I think a lot of people got into Web3, NFTs, crypto because they wanted to make money and they wanted to make money fast, and that's great. But I think the reason a lot of people stayed is because they wanted to be part of something. And these early projects really like you were part of a real community and you were there early, and the communities that have sustained in this time, I feel like have cultivated community for the right reasons, not just because people think they're going to get rich by holding certain assets. So the cycles of the crypto markets for strong communities and for strong brands, I think are going to mean less and less over time because that's not going to be the reason you're there. Like I hold Bitcoin right now, it's down like 7% today. I don't care. I'm holding my Bitcoin I don't know that I'm ever going to sell my Bitcoin. And it's because I feel like I'm part of something. And that might not be the case for everybody, but for the people that we really care about, if it's only about the money for them, this isn't the right place for them. This is the right place if you believe that economics being injected in our brand makes the community and fan experience even sweeter. That is what it is for us, right? Like if you really think about the way most fandom exists today, whether it's a sports fandom or a character universe or whatever, you go to the movies, you go to the games, you buy the merchandise, maybe you play video games that they make, maybe you visit theme parks. That IP owner rarely knows those actions that are being taken by their biggest supporters. And if you don't know that those people are taking those actions, how could you ever reward those people? And if you can't reward those people, you're actually probably leaving a little bit of money on the table, because if people feel like them participating in something that they already love might deliver a little extra something back to them, that makes them want to go even further. It makes them want to share more content, tell their family and friends about it even more. Maybe it makes them even want to spend more money because, again, they feel like they're part of something and they feel like they're being seen. I think that is what ultimately transcends the cycles of digital assets. And, again, I think we're early, but I think PFP communities that have stuck together through the last 2 years are kind of proof of that.
How would you describe the Doodles community? What is the vibe? What are the values? What is the aspiration? How would you describe it?
I mean, I think we have one of the best communities in the entire space because I think people generally believe in the vision of actually being a part of something. I feel like it seems simpler than it actually is, like being a part of something or believing in a vision and feeling like you're actually part of that vision. There's a lot of, well, we have to pay for things. How come we don't get free this? Like, what does this mean for the value of the NFT? Like, what does this do for holders? And for the people that are part of the Doodles community that really understand our vision, they feel like they are part of something much bigger than whatever we're doing today. And the way that we look at this new way of media development and IP development is the IP and the community become so close that they almost become one. So we have our main character Hap in our fictional universe and Mello in our fictional universe, and they have their stories, and that's a major part of Doodles. But what's happening every single day on X and the other social platforms where our community is like actually having a fun time on the internet, that's as much a part of the lore as everything that's happening in our fictional universe. And the two things play off of each other so well. So if you asked a Doodles community member, like what it means to be in the community, I believe that they would tell you they're having a lot of fun being part of the journey of watching this next generation entertainment franchise come together because they're actually one of the characters in that journey.
Maybe as a last question, when we kind of look back on this period of time, let's say in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, what do you think the impact of this way of approaching media and IP will have been in retrospect?
I think when you think about starting an IP, do you want it to be a movie? Do you want it to be a TV show? Do you want it to be a children's book franchise? Do you want it to be a toy franchise? And then have those things be merchandised into other verticals? I think what I hope is that people are going to look at developing IP on chain and look at the Doodles playbook as a new way of bringing stories to market, and a way that is, again, always on. The community is part of the actual story, not just the fictional characters. And I hope people draw comparisons to Pixar and Lucasfilm, where they created some incredible technology to do the things that they wanted to do to tell new stories, but it was always about the storytelling. It was always in service of the storytelling. I hope that people look back at Doodles as somebody that incubated this new format for storytelling, this new way of building enterprise IP that ultimately made a more equitable environment for the creators, for their communities, and for a ton of artists that don't have the opportunities that we have today.
My last conversation is with Yele Bademosi, the co-founder and CEO of Onboard. Yele is a longtime entrepreneur and investor who was based in Nigeria until very recently. And in this conversation, we talk about how he sees Onboard as a way of bringing many more people on chain and the opportunity that that unlocks.
I was doing some research earlier, and I saw that you kind of you describe your personal mission as helping Africa transition into a developed economy. Why do you care about this question?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. Fundamentally, what I've kind of realized is that there are a lot of people who sort of have lost the geographical lottery, whereby because of where you're from and sort of these decade-olds of broken institutions, even though people are extremely talented, they lack access to opportunity. And I used to think that the way to do it was figuring out how to use technology and sort of, to help governments improve. But unfortunately, these institutions are not really ready to change. And that's kind of what has made me become fully committed to this idea of a on-chain economy, just because it's almost like going to a new frontier. Now there's no more land, but we have this infinite on-chain frontier that we can build, institutions from the ground up and make it openly accessible to anyone. And, it's kind of like the American dream, but brought on chain. And so I kind of see that as an on-chain vision. So that's kind of like what I'm committed to, and is now bigger in Africa. If something is universally accessible, then if you're in LATAM, if you're in Southeast Asia, even if you're in Europe, but you feel like you're not able to make enough progress in your personal life because of whatever bias, then there is room for you to, become your ultimate potential on chain. And that's kind of what drives me, and why we do what we do at Onboard.
Mm. But you said that you kind of had this recognition of it's not possible to kind of fix the existing systems.
Yes, exactly.
And it's more effective to go and start anew with this new frontier.
Exactly. I think like there are two quotes that kind of really resonate with me, and I can't remember who said them now, but one of them is like, because the new is unthinkable, we fight over the old, right? And the second one is something about this idea of we can't replace existing systems. We need to sort of create something new that makes the past or the existing systems obsolete, right? And so that's kind of why I'm kind of more interested and just really focused on, okay, we've been given this generational opportunity to build something anew, which wasn't possible before because, you didn't have digital property rights. So I feel quite lucky actually to be alive in this time period whereby something like this exists and we can kind of co-create it together. But yeah.
And you're based in Nigeria, right?
I used to be based in Nigeria. I recently moved to London, UK.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it's maybe on a much longer podcast we can go into some of the things and how I got here. But fundamentally, the idea is, being able to build without sort of like pressure around like personal safety, without sort of thinking about like, infrastructure regulation that is quite volatile, and it can focus on sort of, being innovative. And I've seen other great entrepreneurs make similar journeys, whereby they move from like their home countries to sort of places that allows them to sort of build and be creative without your personal freedoms being sort of restricted. So that's kind of like why I've kind of made the move. But I'm also very aware that it's a privilege. Not everybody is able to move away from a home country. For some, it's become quite expensive to even try to migrate, and for others, they don't have in quote the qualifications that allows you qualify for these highly skilled visas. And so that's kind of why I'm so excited about this, because regardless of where you're from, as long as you have a smartphone and an internet connection, you can get connected to this global launching economy that is more meritocratic, that is more open, that is more rewarding, that is more transparent. Like fundamentally, I believe there's more on chain, or there has the potential to be more on chain. But how do we actualize that vision and make it a reality?
Yeah. I'm curious to double click a little bit on your move, because I think one of the things that, for an audience, at least in my community and general, group of friends and contacts, we're primarily, based in North America, Europe, the Western world, and I feel like it would be really cool to learn more about what it's like to be an entrepreneur in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And
I
how
mean,
would you describe that?
yeah. I mean, I think, if you spoke to me maybe a year ago, I was probably one of the most um, proponents of building for the continent. And actually, my background, if I was to kind of like run through very quickly, in 2016, I was fortunate enough to be the first employee in a company that got acquired, and I started a fund when I was 24 called Microtraction. It has about 80 portfolio companies across 10 different African markets, primarily in fintech. So we were really investing and trying to fix some of these infrastructure and foundational problems. But I kind of feel like that is like putting lipstick on a pig, because unfortunately you're not really solving the root cause. They're just these crazy macro factors that makes it really difficult, whereby it's not because of a lack of effort or ability or even the quality of execution that makes some of these companies sort of struggle. Now, don't get me wrong, we've been able to build companies that have become like billion-dollar companies. Paystack got acquired by Stripe for 200 million. We have maybe about 5 or 6 unicorns. And I remember when I wrote this blog post about innovating on Africa's innovation infrastructure about 7 years ago, my thesis was, if we have, 1,000 venture-backed startups in Africa, would have at least one unicorn. And we've kind of seen that play out. But the concern for me is when it comes to capital allocation, it's also around like capital efficiency and the ROI. And are there better ways to allocate capital that has like a much better return for investments and like a larger impact, not just for Africa, but globally? The answer is yes. So I think as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to ask yourself and say, what is available today that wasn't available, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that allows us to do previously unthinkable things? And that's kind of why I'm really passionate about like this, where we see this technology evolving over the next couple of years.
Yeah. And we'll kind of transition to the technology, but maybe one more follow-up question,
For sure.
just because you've been so closely in it.
Yeah.
What are those macro factors?
Yeah. So, I mean, I mentioned some of them in my talk, my lightning talk earlier, but I think the biggest one is just um, around the currency. So you have like a combination of crazy devaluations, whereby, for instance, if you're a VC fund and you invested in an African startup, let's say Nigerian startup, usually a VC fund, the expectation is that you return 3x on that fund. So if I give a company, let's say $1 million or 100,000, what happens is that 100,000 is converted into a local currency, but then that currency devalues by 75%. To return the dollar back, they need to grow 400% in that 3 years to just even give me $1 back. To return 3x, they need to grow 12 times. And that is really hard. How many startups can go 12x in a 5 to 7 year period, right? So it's not really about the quality of the execution or the idea. And this is kind of why one of my thesis for emerging market entrepreneurs is like build, if you're building like non-on-chain stuff, it's like build or solve local problems with global relevance. But personally, I just think about the on-chain economy as an economy, the same way how you have built for Nigeria or Ghana or Mexico. And most of the channels that are used to acquire customers were digital channels on Facebook or Instagram or Google. Now we can do these things on chain, right? So, and the amount of data, the the fact that you could build these products that make people want to be a part of the story and the vision is really exciting. But obviously, I've kind of made the mistake in the past of focusing on what a lot of the Western voices in the blockchain space have been saying, and I think like that is where we've made or stumbled in the past. So now the way I think about like the on-chain economy is to think about things in like decade cycles and ask myself like what problems can we solve today that will still be relevant 10 years into the future. And this allows us to make kind of like long-term bets about, what we're doing. And it's kind of why we're like 10, 20 years, people are never going to want or stop wanting access to better financial services, right? But again, like I said, we can't solve this ourselves. It's a sort of global kind of gigantic effort to rebuild financial systems from the ground up and making them universally accessible to more people.
So what is it that you're working on?
Yeah. So right now we're building Onboard, and our vision at Onboard is a world where anyone anywhere can come on chain and live a radically better life. And so we decided to solve the first part of that problem, which is how do we create a universally accessible gateway to the on-chain economy? And we did that by creating this peer-to-peer on and off-ramp protocol using a primitive called smart contract escrow accounts. The way it works is we have merchants in the network. You can think of them as like limited, like LPs in like an AMM or any DEX. So these merchants have liquidity in USDC and the local currency. And so what happens is every merchant in the network is given this escrow account, and when I want to on ramp, let's say $10, the USDC in the merchant's wallet gets sent to the escrow, and then I then send them the fiat off chain, and I sign a transaction telling the smart contract I've paid, and then when the value is received on the merchant's end, they sign a contract saying that they received the value. And then the escrowed USDC is then pushed into my wallet. Now, this idea, it works for 10 cents, it works for $1, it works for 10 million. But obviously, the biggest challenge is how do you build this merchant network? Similar to like Uber or Airbnb, and bootstrapping these networks. And that's where like token incentives and stuff like that come into play. To date, we've not done any gamification or token incentives, but we're just beginning to design what that looks like to really scale the network. But the more bigger problem is that creating these gateways that makes the on-chain economy accessible doesn't mean that there's actually value or non-speculative value on chain today, right? So what we are now trying to do is to rally, more developers to think about building exceptional apps that, create sort of world-class financial services or novel on-chain experiences that makes it worthwhile for people to come on chain. And this entire network is not going to be centralized. So imagine a future whereby something as powerful as, WeChat Pay or Google Pay or Apple Pay was owned by its users and members, and then an app store that was also owned by the developers and users. That's sort of like what we're trying to build, and that's our vision with Onboard.
Who do you see as like the target user, like as the archetype of person that today or in the near future is using this system?
Yeah. So we did quite a lot of work actually. We're inspired by Superhuman and kind of what they did to really understand the target user. And we kind of realized that people that found value in Onboard today are actually on-chain builders and creators. So think about it like the early days of Roblox. So the early users of Roblox were building the games and also playing the games as well. So when somebody is an on-chain creator or builder, they want these financial services, they want the apps, but they're also building more apps and services for themselves. And then over time, they'll begin to build for everyday people as the technology and the user experience improves. Right. So right now, we're kind of figuring out like a global sort of go-to-market and a complete sort of like, branding update and repositioning. So within the next like 4 to 6 weeks, we'll be releasing some of these things, and we're quite, excited to tell the world about like Onboard and invite more people to join us on this mission.
So on-chain builders, and it's like folks here, basically,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
And I mean, like there are probably around maybe like 2 to 3 million, which is a small number. But if you think about the number of on-chain online builders and creators, that number is even larger, right? So we are very keen on how do we create that bridge that allows online creators and builders, the folks that build and create things in Web2, to come on chain, right? And that would be like our second like adjacent audience before we then target, everyone else. So if we can show proof points that on-chain builders and creators are actually getting a fairer share of the innovations that they're building on chain, we can sell that, to online builders, and we're like, come on chain and build with us. And that hopefully would create like this flywheel that gets more builders on chain, and we create like this massive Cambrian explosion of like applications for everyday people.
Hey, I have a small ask here. If you've been listening to these conversations and want to support what we're doing here, I would really appreciate if you leave a rating and a review for the podcast. It might seem like a small thing, but it actually makes a big difference to help other people discover the show also. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.